If sources are to be believed, Heroic are going to be rebuilding around the Sangal trio of Linus, Xcloud and Youngster, as well as signing the duo of Some Pious and Nilo from Falcons and Metasport respectively. This comes as Heroic enter a full rebuilding stage. They're going to be losing allegedly a trio of players to Falcons, one player to Liquid, and again, this is more rumoured transfer news, Shush will be leaving to go join NIP. So let's take a look at who the players are that they're signing and what exactly needs to be done. I'm going to give you my perspective as a guy who's followed Sangal, Metasport, these kinds of tier 2 teams all of last year, and I know exactly what these players look like and what they can bring to a roster like Heroic. I'm also going to take a look at how everything's going to fit together, the business Heroic have done in trying to rebuild their team, and give it a grade at the end of this. Just because I've done a Rostermania grades video already, and I thought we'd keep with the theme. Speaking of ending the year and going into the next one, Skin Club are holding a predictions event for the HLTV Awards for 2024. Log in using your Steam, add your Steam trade URL, and then participate in the predictions. If you get enough right, you can enter the giveaways, and these are free to play. Those who can truly read HLTV's mind will be able to enter the gold tier, worth up to $5,000, but the rest of us, who probably get a little less lucky, will be able to enter the silver or the bronze as well. Now, I'm not going to give away all my secrets, but I'm definitely going to tell you this. IGL of the year should go to Alexi B. If it doesn't, I'll be absolutely shocked. Well, appalled and embarrassed on behalf of HLTV. There's no way he doesn't win this. You have until the 11th to enter, and we find out the results on the 13th, so good luck and make your predictions now. In signing Sangal's core, Heroic haven't just gained 3 players. As we all know, with the new Valve ranking system, they've gained a new place in the leaderboards. Currently, Sangal sit 23rd, and that's pretty important, as TOs are currently being pretty much forced to invite teams based entirely on the rankings, and 23rd is more than high enough to receive some invites to big events. Not guaranteed to be invited to all of them, but at least have a good chance to play some notable tournaments in the first season of 2025. One of the big talking points over this offseason is teams not wanting to let go of too many players to try and avoid having to go through a full rebuild. Heroic have taken the big risk in allowing their core to go, getting rid of a couple other players, and just fully restocking with fresh blood and trying to make it back to the top. This is already a bit of a cheat code though, as they've made it pretty much there. They just need to now go out, win matches, and grind those final few places. I think it's pretty realistic to expect them to have achieved sort of top 15 level by the full season of 2025. If this goes to plan, if this roster's good enough for at least what they're aiming for, they should have the invites there. It should be feasible. To get a better idea of whether or not they can do it, let's talk about the players. We'll start with the new IGL, Linus, LNZ. He's been on a lot of people's radar this last year for a couple of very important reasons. Firstly, he's got an impressive amount of firepower for an IGL. Callers aren't typically expected to frag out, although this has been shifting slightly as we've seen more and more IGLs not necessarily putting up astoundingly gaudy numbers, but generally being able to keep up with the pace of modern play, hit headshots when they need to, and not feel left behind by their rosters. Linus has been a great example of this. He's actually playing a lot of rotator spots, taking some space as well on the T side, but also being very impactful relative to his roles and relative to his position on the roster. For his first full year calling, he's actually had a pretty impressive run. His T-side win rate has been really strong, and a lot of it's based on 4v5s, trading out opening deaths and making the right moves in the mid-round in order to maximize this team's potential. He's had a few unique pieces to work with as well, as the roster is very extreme between the lurkers and the openers. And yet, he's made it work, so a lot of credit to him and obviously his coach for the last year, but I think he's been a bit of a diamond in the rough this season, and Heroic have a great opportunity to polish him up and put him on display. If you looked at their map pool over the year, they played about 5 maps decently well in my eyes, not least of which was Nuke, which is always a map that's difficult to get right. It's difficult to be particularly dominant on it as well, just due to its complexities, but Sangal were always a threat. They were able to get big wins over Heroic and FaZe at Pro League, and the fact that they had so many maps in their pool to go to, like Anubis, like Ancient, all of which were strong, and even the occasional Dark Horse Vertigo pick. They were a really diverse team and difficult to predict when going up against them. Up next is Xcloud, the hard opener and entry of the team. He's really the guy who's going to be taking a large volume of opening fights, but also just fights in general. In my mind, he's basically a Jacob regen from a different nationality. Like, this guy takes all those fights the way Jacob likes to, hits them at a relatively similar rate. Like, something I've always said about Jacob is that no matter what the level is, he's going to give you roughly 0.72 to 0.75 KPR. It seems almost inevitable they'd be able to do that, xCloud has been pretty similar. He even gave us decent fragging numbers in the big games against FaZe, against Heroic. Even though they did lose some of these games, he was able to keep the pace at tier 1, something you don't really guarantee when you're talking about a player as young as him. He's definitely very talented, although obviously he still has a lot to prove moving up into tier 1. This is why this team is still a bit of a risk. As much as I've already talked up the fact that they are young, they have all this ranking behind them, they're not quite the guaranteed end product that you'd like. We saw that at Shanghai. They weren't really able to deliver on all their promise. That was very unfortunate, but there's much more left to unlock in these players than just what we've seen in 2024. Finally, from this Sangal core is Youngster. Now, Youngster, for a lot of people, obviously isn't the most exciting player. We all know Jota, but he's made his way over to Eternal Fire. We'll talk about that in another video. But he's been surprisingly solid as the deep in the trenches, hard support type guy. His numbers, at least just on the face of it, if you're just looking at something like rating, don't really paint him as a strong fragger, and you may be surprised when you actually go and watch him, you actually see the type of fights he wins. He's pretty talented. He's going to shock a lot of people in the coming year. He's not going to be the most impactful on winning, just in terms of the spots he plays. You know, xCloud's going to be more important, Linus can be more important, Orpa Rifler more important, but Youngster will have rounds, will have maps, will have moments where he'll just hit some crazy shots, and don't be caught off guard. He does have that in his locker. Now, we've recapped now the core trio. Well, for me, recap. For some of you, I'm sure, learn everything new for the first time. How do the other two additions compare to their counterparts? Now, the first, the easiest upgrade relative to Sangal that we saw in 2024 is the Orpa. Sammy was not spectacular for Sangal, and I feel pretty okay saying this. Like, there were a lot of places he could have improved. He didn't have great playmaking ability or instinct or will. He seemed very reluctant to actually put himself out there, try and hit difficult shots, put himself in compromising positions to go and win rounds. It just wasn't in his wheelhouse, his instinct, his nature. He was very supportive of the other players and did a lot of little gritty things right. You know, he was able to trade in a lot of situations, throw the right utility. He just wasn't a game changer. Now, the rumored Orpa coming in is Sunpius, and wow, is that something we expect from Sunpius? Especially from his Ents days, where he did actually play under Saw. He was absolutely thriving in that system. Sure, I think Snappy did play a part, but hell, if Heroic keeps Saw, we're not sure actually who the coach is going to be, but let's just play into some of the things I've seen on Twitter. If they keep Saw, a lot of people are assuming they are because he's their guy right now. You know, he's been together with them for so long. Sunpius has already thrived under Saw. Why wouldn't he again? I mean, Falcons was a bit of a rough time, but if you looked at overall how he performed, it wasn't as tragic as the results really implied. Their problem was more of a rifle sort of firepower deficiency, not so much an Orpa being completely unworthy of his position. Relative to Sammy, I think he's going to be a huge upgrade. Not a small upgrade, not a marginal upgrade, massive upgrade. This guy is a beast. He's got a lot that he wants to really make up for. You know, 2024 for him was a wasted year, as much as it was for everyone else who was committed to that Falcons project. He could have been doing so much more, and he's willing to show it. I'm sure of it. He'll come back. Expect 2025. If Sangal can get enough results to play enough big events, to be a Sunpius top 20 HLTV year. That's what I'm expecting. He'll be on the right team for it. Back with his coach that made him really shine. This could be it. Now, the player I'm most fascinated by is one of the players who was on my top 5 prospects of the year for 2024. We did the recap show. He finished number 2 for me. And that's because of a couple of factors. For me, when I talk about prospects, I talk about current and potential level. Nilo is currently already playing some outstanding Counter-Strike. And it's really fascinating the reason why. Because for a player so young who plays on the rifles, especially in CS2 with the way the meta's shaped, you don't expect a player to be super great because of how controlled and intelligent they are. It's usually a lot to do with their movement mechanics, their ability to flick, adjust to headshots. It's very explosive fragging centric. And whilst Nilo is mechanically quite sharp, it's nowhere near as important as his ability to read and understand the game and have a perfect feel at times for the spacing and the timing of Counter-Strike. That really makes, I think, a lot of teams tick. You just don't quite realize it. It's what made Twist so great on FaZe relative to Frozen, and it's what I think will make Nilo so outstanding on this team, despite the fact that he doesn't quite play the way Jota did, who is the player he's replacing. Now, Jota was pretty prototypical of CS2. He was very willing to go make plays, despite being an anchor, despite being a lurker. He would swing into space and make really impactful shots. Nilo is more a case of a player who's going to make impactful moves. I've been watching some demos today just from his most recent series against, what are they called? Zero Tenacity. And he has some moments where it's just like, there's chaos, absolute chaos, but he instinctively dives through a smoke, finding the perfect gap, blanks a player, shoots him in the head. You're like, in all the mess, all the muss, the fuss, he was able to piece together a situation perfectly, outflank the other team, and still get a kill. It's what makes him such an outstanding lurker. But let's talk about the roles and how they mesh, because that might be the problem. On the T side, yes, it's perfect. Sure, he doesn't play his lurks in the same way Jota did, but he still is a lurker. And I think you'll see he won't be as aggressive. He won't be willing to take so many openings. That really won't be his style, but he is going to be an amazing trader. When you finally execute towards a bomb site, he'll be off the shoulder of that entry player like he was a lot of the time on Metasport behind Adam B. A great example of a good entry player with a great trader with him. We expect to see that same dynamic here. Either him trading Linus or xCloud, depends on who's leading the way into those site takes. He will be in the right space, swing at the right time, and hit those shots. And then the other rounds, he will be hard closing, looking for deep late lurks, making sure that the rounds are finished in his favor. It's not going to be particularly flamboyant or explosive, but it's going to leave a lot of space for the rest of the team to try and make moves and have their way. Something else you'll see in his demos is, as a more passive, more late round player, he's able to control a lot of space very well. This is something I really like from Yimfat's demos, from his T-sides when he was in an academy. He wasn't overly pressed, overly rushed, yet he still maintained the map control he needed to make sure he could then go on and make his plays. Nilo is the same way. Now, this is something I actually critiqued him for when he was on Young Ninjas back in 2023. He wasn't actually that smart about his plays. A lot of the time his reads were off. All of the things I've just said that have been so positive about him on Metasport weren't quite there yet when I watched him back then. Now, he's really come into his own. Another of the reasons why I think his style may work well for Sangal is that it felt like on T-sides, they sometimes lacked a closer. Now, sure, players like Youngster, players like Samey could have their moments in those sorts of post plants, but none were really masters of it. And I think Nilo is going to be far stronger than either of those two players were, and as well as adding some Pius into the mix, this team just got a lot more dynamic and a lot more interesting on that T side, far less dependent on explosive multis from their openers, and able to win rounds in a slightly longer, more grindy fashion. Now, the one concern that I kind of hinted at is the clash in his CT positions. Currently on Metasport, Nilo is playing hard rotate spots. He's all over the place, he goes wherever he wants. He gets to float a lot. But I think due to his skill set, he's going to be a far stronger anchor than we ever really would anticipate from a player who's played so much rotator. Because of the way he does rotate, because of the way he does play on the T side, we notice that he is very happy to be relatively slow paced, relatively static at times, and only swing when he needs to and when he should. And this will translate incredibly well to anchoring bomb sites, better than I think a lot of other players who play these sorts of roles would at this level. Not only does this allow him to take some anchor spots that are actually needed, it also means that we can find some middle ground. He doesn't have to just play those spots, and we don't just have to force the players who currently maintain those positions off of them. We find a happy medium where Linus gets to do a little bit of anchoring, but also can stay dynamic on certain maps in order to benefit him when he's not feeling that comfortable in terms of his calling. If on a certain map he prefers to be active, we can give him that as long as he's able to concede in a few other spaces where Nilo is able to make his reads and make his moments happen while still maintaining the team's balance. Now let's grade this, because there's a few things to consider when grading a move like this one. It's not just who they've added, it's why they've had to add them. You know, they've lost their entire roster, but been given a massive influx of cash to try and replace them with. And what they've done is rather smart. They haven't gone out and spent the millions they've been rumored to have received in all these moves. We've seen some leaks from Overdrive I'm talking more than 5 million for the entire roster in the end. That's a lot of money. Knowing the buyouts of the players they've got, they definitely haven't spent all of that money. What they've done is sort of min-maxed. They've managed to get a core who are in the top 25. They've added 2 players who are incredibly talented, but undervalued probably for different reasons. I say that from some Pius especially. Nilo wasn't undervalued. It's not the first time someone's tried to buy him out, and in the past, the price they've asked for at Metasport has been too high for a lot of people. So I know he wasn't cheap, but hey, they managed to get him out. He certainly didn't cost $5 million. He's not Kyosuke or Donk or something else. Some other player with some ridiculous price tag attached and a lot of hype. He's been rather quiet this year due to Metasport's topsy-turvy seasons. So I do think they've done some really astute business here. Now, I want to give them an A. Obviously, it would have been even better if they could have, for similar prices, maybe got themselves straight back into the top 15. But I think that might have been unrealistic. I'm not sure there's actually a way to do that off the top of my head. So maybe what we've ended up here is just the best possible option. So I'm going to give them an A flat. Yes, there's still a lot they need to do in the coming season. They still have to go and win enough matches to keep the invites coming, and also make sure that in the second season of the year, they are guaranteed to be playing all the big events. That's going to be critical for them. And then qualifying for the majors, obviously, always a big part of the season. All in all, I think they've done outstanding work. I think they've managed to min-max in the right way, where they've got enough money in the coming seasons to really just keep this team around, and if needed, still go out and make another upgrade. This is a great roster move, and I can't wait to watch the new look Heroic. If you enjoyed, leave a like, leave a comment telling me your thoughts about this rumored Heroic move. If it doesn't go down this way, I'll be very curious to see which way it does go down. So yeah, remember, members get access to more content and the ability to vote on videos and some other special perks. And it's the best way to support the channel, so please do. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.